A couple of months ago, I was watching a video analysis about a particular show from a particular streaming service. I'd never seen the show, but the person presenting the video essay described a scene that contained especially offensive material that was handled rather poorly by the writers of this program. And the commentator wanted to use that scene as an opportunity to educate people about the actual reality behind that material and why we as a society need to take it seriously. I know that's pretty vague, but the point is not the particular video. The point is that I could actually not make it all the way through her commentary. Merely hearing the description of this particular scene was enough to set off some of my worst trauma-related symptoms. I started getting nauseous, I got lightheaded, and I had to lie down to keep from falling over, and I eventually just cried. These are actually rare symptoms for me, and I even felt somewhat embarrassed that I was so triggered by the description of a TV show. It's not simply that I was bothered in that particular moment, but rather that I carried the disturbance with me. And it gave me a vague sense of anxiety that, for a brief time, made me even afraid of social interactions. I'm doing better now, thank you for your concern, but that instance got me thinking about the issue more broadly. Why was I so upset? And taking into account other situations in which I've been provoked in this way, I started wondering in general, why does commercial media bother us so much? So in this video, I hope to dive into that question, because I think it's rather important for our own cultural moment. In many ways, I see things like cancel culture as a symptom of this broader problem. Why does commercial media bother us? Before we really get into it, I should make a few distinctions. This is a problem that impacts people regardless of political affiliation or religion or what have you. Those differences might influence what upsets us, but that does not determine whether or not we get upset at all. Conservatives and liberals, atheists and Christians can all experience a deep disturbance by engaging particular kinds of commercial media. Whether it's having triggers related to trauma or being offended at morally objectionable content, the problem impacts us all. I'll talk about the distinction between being triggered and being offended and how to practically deal with those problems in my next video. But for now, let's try to understand the phenomenon itself. And in answering the question of why commercial media upsets us so much, I want to turn to the question of space. Not outer space like the cosmos, but space like the space of a room or the space of a building. When I had that upsetting and triggering experience that I mentioned at the start of this video, I was partially so upset because the threat felt so big. It was not merely an instance of someone saying something mean to me in person. Sure, that's hurtful, but typically I can walk away or leave that person. But in the case of this show, I knew that thousands or maybe even millions of people were watching it. Talk show hosts were making jokes about it. It was trending on Twitter. The chances were that several of my friends loved it. Heck, maybe I'd go on a date with a woman and she would mention how much she loved this show. All of these people were loving something that caused me to nearly throw up. In other words, the threat felt almost omnipresent, as if it could transcend time and space well beyond interpersonal threats. When it comes to the mass production of entertainment, we live in a unique era. The conditions in which we consume media have increasingly become relegated to our personal spaces. In the 20th century, inventions like cable TV, vinyl records, and VHS tapes allowed families to bring commercial media into their homes at unprecedented rates. Films and music were no longer relegated to theater spaces, but could instead inhabit your living room. The mass production of media was able to take over more territory than ever before, and thus constitutes, in our own day, a network of virtual space that exists alongside us at all times. Even before the internet or VHS, Andy Warhol provides a powerful example of such virtual media space. Quote, "Before media, there used to be a physical limit on how much space one person could take up by themselves. People, I think, are the only things that know how to take up more space than the space they're actually in, because with media, you can sit back and still and let yourself fill up space on records, in the movies, on the telephone, on television. If you were the star on the biggest show on television and took a walk down an average American street one night while you were on the air, and if you looked through the windows and saw yourself on television in everybody's living room, taking up some of their space, can you imagine how you would feel?" Our world is quickly becoming an augmented reality. We now live alongside of and inside of this virtual space of media, and this has profoundly reconfigured much of the way that humanity lives. And this can be both positive and negative. A positive example would be Mr. Rogers, who saw this virtual space of public television as an opportunity to bring love, care, compassion, beauty, encouragement, and education to his audience, who were typically children. He became our virtual neighbor, and I personally still turn to segments of his videos when I need comfort or encouragement. Unfortunately, not everyone is as kind as Mr. Rogers. I'm a fan of an old TV show called Tales from the Dark Side that used to air on CBS in the 80s and was produced by the famous director George A. Romero. It was kind of like The Twilight Zone if you've never seen it. There's an interesting t-shirt that was made for this show that depicts a young child watching Tales from the Dark Side on his TV, which inevitably summons a demonic monster, thus turning cable into a type of conduit for hostile supernatural forces. The idea of a monster emerging from media to attack you is a common theme in storytelling. One popular example was the hit movie The Ring from 2002, which tells the story of a cursed VHS tape. Those unfortunate enough to watch the tape are eventually killed by a ghostly figure who crawls out of their television. Another famous example is the haunting scene from Poltergeist, where immaterial ghostly figures emerge from the TV static and cause physical disturbances in the room. Personally, I find these to be great metaphors for the way that media can so deeply affect us. Let's use film as an example. Though the images of film might be technically relegated to your television set or computer screen, the film itself is able to produce an atmosphere that extends beyond the confines of the picture. Movies invoke audio that sends sound waves coursing through your room. The film scores, performances of the actors, and narrative elements communicate emotions that affect us and our bodies. We cry, or celebrate, or fall in love along with the characters. Thus, qualities of the movie are happening beyond the confines of the screen and are even being experienced within our own bodies. These atmospheres and affects, as they're sometimes called, can be both positive and negative. In a positive sense, we might gain additional empathy for people who are different than us, being challenged to see their dignity and worth. We might learn to vicariously experience the beauty of forgiveness and reconciliation through the courageous choices of the characters on screen. One great example of this would be the 2016 film Moonlight. Even horror films can be opportunities for us to process fears and threats in a controlled environment. They can train us to think through dangerous situations and how to handle them. You probably know people who scream at the characters in horror movies for making dumb decisions. Likewise, horror films can provide symbolic tools for dealing with our own personal monsters, such as Stephen King's It, which is a narrative about dealing with childhood trauma and learning how to transform that trauma into a power that can defeat even the greatest of evils. But the atmospheres and emotional affects of media can just as easily be used in negative ways. There are plenty of movies or television shows that have deep moral problems. Highly sensitive issues like abuse can be handled in callous ways. Verbal abuse among spouses is sometimes used for, quote, comedic value. Sexual assault is sometimes used as an excuse to show naked women on screen, thus eroticizing traumatic violence. And of course, there are numerous other problems, such as making fun of plus-size people or belittling people with disabilities, propagating sexist or racist tropes. The list goes on and on. For some of these items, it's not a matter of its inclusion within the narrative, but rather the way it's framed and handled in the film. Let's take racism as an example. Racism might be a theme within the movie, but that does not make it automatically offensive, because the film might itself be explicitly anti-racist, perhaps highlighting heroes of the civil rights movement or something like that. But in other cases, the film might include these elements in a callous way, or even in a sinister way, which is typically when deep disturbances occur. Thus, media can transform the space we are inhabiting into a threatening atmosphere in which we no longer feel safe, and it can likewise cause our bodies to react with real physical symptoms of anxiety or pain. To summarize, the mass production and proliferation of media has augmented our reality, such that we inhabit both physical and virtual spaces. In many respects, it's as if our world is being colonized by a digital world that has quickly transformed the landscape of our lives. These virtual media spaces are able to generate real atmospheres and emotional affects inside of us, whether that's within a theater, a concert hall, at church, or in our living rooms. When handled in the wrong way, or when it becomes mixed with our own personal traumatic experiences, media can deeply upset us. People don't typically like to see their deepest insecurities mocked in a sitcom. People don't typically want to see their greatest traumas played out callously in a movie or used for inappropriate purposes. Unfortunately, as mass media and the culture industry continues to grow, we are routinely exposed to such images, sounds, and atmospheres. This can produce plenty of anxiety and sadness well beyond what previous generations experienced. And it's common for companies or artists to deliberately include offensive material in order to get free publicity from everyone fighting on social media about their song or film. If you want more of a discussion on this, I recommend the video, quote, Cuties and WAP Culture War, end quote, by the YouTube channel Meme Analysis. I'll put the link in the description. These problems can feel omnipresent and bigger than anything we are capable of handling. But I don't think that the situation is hopeless. In my next video, I will talk about some ways in which we can practically manage this problem and how we can learn to respond in positive ways. But for the time being, I will leave on a theological note from perhaps an unexpected source. If you recall back to the opening illustration of this video, as I was crying that one night, and I was experiencing all of these different traumatic experiences, I recalled a short film from my childhood that perhaps you've seen, Where's God When I'm Scared, by none other than VeggieTales. In the story, a little boy is terrified of a monster that he sees on television, and he has a hard time going to sleep at night because he is afraid that the boogeyman he saw on TV is going to get him. The threat seemed so big, and he felt helpless. Likewise, when I was feeling that this problem was too big for me to handle, I was reminded of the song that was given to the boy in VeggieTales. The lyrics are as follows. God is bigger than the boogeyman. He's bigger than Godzilla and the monsters on TV. God is bigger than the boogeyman, and he's watching out for you and me. Only God is omnipresent. Only God is all-powerful. Until my next video, I encourage you to think about the theology of that song and how it might critique the current media world in which we live. Thank you so much for listening. Wherever you are, I hope you have a blessed day.